And now, all the way from the other side of the pond, it's the Tea Party Power Hour with Mark Gillar.
Welcome to the Tea Party Power Hour. I am your host, Mark Gillar. Today we're going to be talking with Mr. John O'Connor. He's a trial lawyer practicing in San Francisco, been doing so since 1972. This resume is incredible. He represented the government during the OPEC oil embargo. He was writing Fifth Amendment and state of mind briefs for the prosecution in the United States versus Patty Hearst. He defended R.J. Reynolds' tobacco and represented Mark Felt, a.k.a. Deep Throat, regarding the revelation of his identity as Deep Throat. John, welcome to the show.
Good with you, Mark.
Hey, I can't tell you how excited I am about this. Now, Postgate alleges, and I think backs it up with documentation, that there was a lot more to Watergate than anyone knew at the time. And I'm not going to spoil the surprise. I'm going to let you go over that. But kind of go over how most people think of Watergate when they look back. Oh, yeah, Nixon had some people break into his opponent's headquarters at the Watergate complex, yada, yada, yada. He was doing it to spy on him, so he could get opposition research. And that's about as far as most people can take it. I mean, I was 9 years old at the time. And I know that's the thumbnail sketch that I got in school. But tell us a little bit about the way it's portrayed, and then tell us what you think really happened.
First of all, the way it was portrayed is you had this odd burglary on June 17th, 1972, where 5 fellows were arrested in the headquarters of the Democratic National Committee. They had cameras out and were photographing things, had some wiretapping equipment. And so this odd burglary, because the burglars were connected, at least some of them, and their supervisors were connected to the campaign, ostensibly had some lower campaign employment. 2 of the 7 there's 5 burglars and 2 supervisors. And so most people thought, yes, this is an odd campaign operation. Nixon was ahead by 20 points at the time. There was no need for a break-in or desperate action. They thought, this is odd. And Nixon's White House said, well, this is some kind of a rogue operation. These people, we don't know what happened. And so the needle did not move at all. The public was not impressed by this burglary as being a big deal. Nixon stayed way ahead in the polls and won the election. However, the Washington Post, through reporters Bob Woodward and Bernstein, kept writing about it and trying to make a sensation out of it. And they were kind of eye-catching headlines about how the campaign funded these people and so forth. But the public went ho-hum. What's the big deal? Then Woodward started going to the garage with a fellow named Deep Throat, published some articles suggesting that this whole thing was part of a massive campaign of spying and sabotage directed by the White House. That got everybody all a Twitter. And it got people thinking, well, maybe this is part of a larger campaign operation where the White House is abusing its power and trying to get elected by illegal means. So the narrative shifted because the Post reporting, aided by its great source, Deep Throat, a fellow who met Woodward in the garage late at night and gave him some information. Then later on, the president's counsel said, Nixon tried to cover this up. The deputy campaign aide, Jeb Magruder, was the deputy to John Mitchell, Nixon's close confidant and former attorney general who headed the campaign. And he said, John Mitchell, the head of the campaign and the former attorney general and the close confidant of Richard Nixon, ordered this break-in. Well, there you have it. With those 2 things, that is to say that the White House was directing this widespread campaign, and it surely went up to the top. If John Mitchell was involved, then Nixon knew everything about it. And Nixon was then deemed to have covered up Watergate by not acknowledging his responsibility and so forth. And they had made payments. The burglars all demanded payments as, to support their families and so forth and so on. And the White House was paying them money. Nixon never could figure out what really went on. And there's no doubt that he engaged in a couple of, deceptive cover ups just to, hopefully to sort of keep the press away from him. But Nixon never knew what had happened. And he swore all along he never knew what had happened, but nobody believed him. And Mitchell swore all along that he didn't order the burglary and had nothing to do with the campaign. Nobody believed him. Now, as a result of the research of others, we know now that the burglary really was a combination of the CIA, which had infiltrated the White House, and a couple of lower level people who were interested in what the CIA was interested in. What was the CIA interested in? They were wiretapping the Democratic officials who were calling down the street to a bordello. And they were interested in important people talking to naughty girls and seeing what they could find out through this mechanism. And it was a long-standing CIA program, both to find out information and more importantly, probably to get compromising information to extort people. In my view, a young aide wishing to work his way up in the White House was interested in this kind of stuff too, so he could have his own intelligence dossier on these fellows, having nothing to do with the campaign. So basically, it was a CIA operation. Now, what about the Washington Post? The Washington Post published approximately, I'm going to say, 2,000 articles, 3,000 articles during 2 years, making this a sensation and forever changing the landscape of journalism. Now, Nixon left office mainly because of a journalistically impelled scandal. It was the only time in our history that a president has resigned from office or been pushed from office, and it was done by journalism. At that point, journalists thought, we have the power. This is the modern age. Journalists control what is right and wrong. We're there to ride herd on politicians, and boy, we really know what we're doing. So we now have this whole modern idea for the past 50 years that the press is king. The press can do no wrong. The press tells us who should win and who should lose, who's bad, who's good. Now, here's the problem. The problem is that what the Post reported was false, and they knew it was false. The Post reporters and the editors had more information about this burglary than Nixon ever had. Nixon could never figure out what had happened, and his top aides could not figure out what had happened. As a matter of fact, they suspected John Mitchell of ordering this, but they didn't know why. They couldn't figure it out. They thought there was something to cover up. There wasn't. In fact, the Post was covering up things from Nixon and the public. They were not telling people, and they were giving a false impression about the White House. And so what happens is the Post now, I come along, I know who Deep Throat is. Nobody else knows who it is. I knew who it is. And just by happenstance, I happened to run into him. My daughter's good friend at school at Stanford University was the grandson of Mark Felt. And when I found that out, I said to the young man, well, your grandfather's Deep Throat. I'd like to come and talk to him. So I came and talked to Mark Felt, and the number 2 man in the FBI who was Deep Throat. I persuaded him to come out and tell his story. But in the course of this, I still had not suspected that the Post was deliberately lying on Watergate. One thing led to another. I wrote a book. I got involved with the Post, and I started getting the sense that there was something not right here. So probably I spent 10 years of my life researching Watergate articles and all the information available to the Post. I have all 3,000 articles, I'm proud to say, in my garage. My wife is not so proud and would love it if I just dump them in the trash and please quit this stuff. Yeah. But I wrote a book at great expense and great time, and it's a labor of love. But I didn't do it to make money. I did it to tell the world Watergate was falsely reported. A president was falsely um, pushed from office. In those days, of course, we didn't have the internet that where sleuths could at least check on the papers as we did in Russiagate and at least give some minority version of what would happen. But we had none of that in Watergate. And I thought it was very important for me to come out with this book so that everybody can see that the major media is not to be trusted. And if they lied in Watergate and pushed out a president as a result of Watergate, what are they doing now? Right now, there is no doubt, and there's a long history of it in the present days, long present history, I should say, of them doing this to Trump. And as a matter of fact, one leading dean of a journalism graduate program told his few students after Trump got elected, don't worry, we're going to Watergate him. Watergate became a waymark of getting rid of a politician you didn't like or hyping one you did like. So if Joe Biden is corrupt, or if there is a laptop of his son that talks about corruption, that's not going to come out. That's going to be suppressed. On the other hand, a false story like Russiagate will then become gospel truth. So what we have is we have a media that is really distorting, suppressing, concealing, and making up falsehoods, concealing the truth. And we have a democracy that depends on information. So here we have this democracy, and we're looking to the mainstream media, and they're not telling us the truth. Now, again, because of the internet, because of really some pretty darn good local market radio, because of certain independent sites who report the truth without fear or favor, like yours does, I might add. Now we at least can get a minority view out there. The issue for traditional people, I consider myself a traditional liberal who now is considered a conservative, but I'm a traditional liberal. My father was a Democratic politician, a moderate one, but I see that anything that is traditional or good about our country is not being reported fairly. And I think it's important for everyone to know that. But conservatives are so almost immune from a bad press. They almost accept it. They're not as excited about propelling this message as they should be. If I wrote a book like this excoriating Trump, it would be on the front page of every paper in the world. I've written this book, and they're trying to suppress it. People who read it understand that I've got the real goods on the Post, and I think it's important that people, I don't care if you steal the books, I don't care about money. I do care about people knowing the truth.
Well, I think one of the big differences when you look back at what Woodward and Bernstein were doing back in 1972 versus what we're seeing now is that the current mainstream media has dropped all pretense of objectivity. They really don't care. I mean, they ran with the Russian collusion nonsense for 2.5 years, and I haven't seen a single apology come out of any of the networks that did that. So they'll basically admit that. And I think one of the things that's puzzling, well, there are a couple things that are puzzling about this. First of all, there's a story about the White House and prostitutes, and Bill Clinton isn't involved. Okay, that's a real shocker for me. But getting more serious, what a lot of people don't understand is just how we got into this position. I mean, here's the way it feels to me is your average everyday layperson. They control the courts. They control education from pre-K through graduate school. They control the entertainment industry. They control the news industry. And I don't think you can get a fair story out like yours without being canceled or suppressed, as you say. If you wanted to, those types of stories are just not allowed out.
Oh, that's right. And as a matter of fact, I have it on pretty good inference, let's put it that way, that even Fox News has been bullied by the Post to not report my findings. I believe these folks are ordered from on high not to do anything. It's very, very tough to get this out because anyone who publishes my story is automatically persona non grata in New York and Washington, D.C. That's just a simple fact of it. So it's interesting. I'm talking about a book that suppresses the truth. In my book, Suppressing the Truth is Being Suppressed, about suppressing the truth is being suppressed. It reminds me of in Seinfeld, the Seinfeld character Kramer had an idea. He said, I'll write a coffee table book about coffee tables, and the coffee table book will have fold out legs so that it can be a coffee table. Well, I've kind of got the same thing here, Mark. I've got a book about suppression of the truth to influence and fool the public, and that about suppression of information, and now my book has been suppressed.
That's so ironic. And I remember Barack Obama promising us that he was going to have the most transparent administration in American history. And as Sarah Palin pointed out, after Obama and Biden got into office, Joe Biden held a meeting about transparency that was not open to the press. So, I mean, it's that kind of thing. I mean, I don't understand it. I'm not going to pretend to understand it. I don't think anyone does. You're a lawyer. I'd like to throw some of these Trump cases by you and see what you think about them in terms of their merit. I'd like to start first with the civil case, the E. Jean Carroll case. Basically, a he said, she said. What do you make of that case, and how surprised were you at the verdict?
Well, I wasn't surprised just because everyone in New York hates Trump. But, you have two cases there. The first one is about an assault that allegedly happened, 20, 30 years ago in the dressing room at Bloomingdale's or wherever. And if nothing else, it seems tremendously overblown, and the facts as related by her were very inconsistent, and they didn't quite seem to add up. Now, I don't doubt that, maybe there's some truth that maybe Trump made a pass at a girl, this woman, and so forth. But it was just so odd, the place it supposedly happened in a changing room at Bloomingdale's. None of it makes sense. If you were going to assault somebody, other than assaulting them at Yankee Stadium at second base, I can't think of a worse place to assault someone than the dressing room in Bloomingdale's, with people running outside all over the place and people coming in and out, and you're going to assault one. But put that aside. He gets hit there, and I think he got hit for $5 million in damages or something. But then the oddity was the second case in which after Trump declared his innocence and said the woman was lying, now he's charged again with defamation for saying he was lying about the first case. And so now the judge instructs the jury that they have to, they can't get into whether or not it's true that Trump was lying, because the jury came back in the first case. So they said, okay, no, Trump, you don't have the right to tell people why she's lying. So the judge, I thought that was very much of a corrupt trial. I think it was a kangaroo court, and Trump then the jury just threw the book at him. I forget how much in punitive damages.
It's over 80 million.
So that's just really an odd case, because especially in the second case, he didn't even get a chance to say why he felt that she was lying. That's the essence of it. And just because a jury found one thing in another case, in a case before, doesn't mean for sure that she wasn't lying. It means by a preponderance of the evidence, on balance, we think it's more likely 51% versus 49%, that she's telling the truth. But now when Trump now goes into trial 2 to say why he thought that the verdict was wrong, now he can't even do that.
Wow.
So that's a bad case. Second case, Letitia James now is suing him for overvaluing his properties. Well, he has a personal financial statement that he gives to lenders that the lenders, frankly, either A, don't pay attention to, or B, they do their own due diligence on
Yes.
it. And C, it's not really important for them when he's applying for a loan for a building. Anybody who's in the business knows that you look at the value of the asset, the building you're seeking to loan on, and not the person's personal financial statement. And the testimony has been like that. There is no one got defrauded. That statute seeks to stop consumer fraud. Fraud involves someone relying on a false statement to its detriment. There was not one bit of testimony that anybody relied on its statement to its detriment. There was no damage. And if there's no damage, there's no fraud.
Many years ago, I worked for a real estate developer, and yes, you turn in your rent rolls and your balance sheets and everything else, but real estate developers are known for putting their best foot forward when it comes to their own evaluation of their properties. So the bankers, as I recall, said, yes, we made that loan. Nothing he gave us affected the interest rate on the loan. We made money on that loan. He paid it back on time. And yes, we would make that loan again. So there's no victim, from what I can tell.
There wasn't a victim. And if there's no victim, there's no fraud. I can go down the street and tell people that my Corvette is a great Corvette. It doesn't have any problems. But if I'm not trying to get money from people for it, I'm not defrauding anybody. And
That's
if nobody loses any money, and if somebody ends up buying it from me but pays the fair value of it and hasn't lost a dime, then it's also not fraud. And if the person buying from me doesn't care what I said about the car, it's not fraud. So all these things make no sense, and it's clearly just a put-up job to get Trump. And then, of course, the two things we've been talking about, Mark, are the least of Trump's problems because they're not criminal cases. They're terrible kangaroo court cases. Now you have this case for the false records case,
right,
which is the worst of all the cases I've seen. In this, supposedly he made a false business record when the company listed the payment to Stormy Daniels as a legal expense. And I don't know what he's supposed to say about it. Say, oh, payment to porn star. But supposedly that's a false statement. Okay, let's say it is. I'm not so sure it is a false statement, but it has to be made with intent to defraud. Trump didn't make that statement with intent to defraud. Now, what I've just described is the misdemeanor. You have to make a false statement with intent to defraud, and it's a misdemeanor. That statute of limitations ended 5 years ago. So in order for it to be a felony and the statute of limitations to apply, that false record, allegedly false record, with intent to defraud, must be done to conceal or commit yet another crime. Now, here's the problem. There is no other crime. Let's assume that there is a false statement. I don't think there is one, but let's assume the statement is false, that this was a legal expense. What is he doing it for? According to the theory is he was getting together with other people to prevent the public from knowing about his Stormy Daniels affair, which would have hurt him in the polls in the wake of the Billy Bush I Grab Women tape. And so I don't think there's any doubt, Mark, that every candidate tries to put his best foot forward and doesn't like bad stories. Bill Clinton had a whole war room stopping the bad stories on him. Everybody does it. Hillary Clinton did it. So is it a crime to get together with people to say, you know something, we've got to keep the Stormy Daniels things out of the paper. We'll pay her money. There's nothing wrong with paying people money. to keep their mouth shut. That's unfortunately the modern world. When there's celebrities, they will pay money to keep their name out of the paper. And so Trump did that. But is it a crime? No. No, there's nothing wrong. Every campaign is a conspiracy to make the candidate look good. It's just not an illegal conspiracy. A conspiracy is just two or more people getting together to agree to do something. It's not an illegal conspiracy. So the judge has been very obtuse. He's never instructed the jury. Well, of course, he's not going to instruct the jury that there is no crime because he wouldn't have a case.
Right.
And this judge is obviously has a daughter who's raises money based upon this very prosecution. I mean, it's just really very, very troubling that this would be the case. The prosecution in New York has been clearly talk about an illegal conspiracy or conspiracy. They conspired with the White House to bring this case. I'm not so sure that's illegal. I think you probably can conspire to bring a case. But if anyone's conspiring to do anything, it's the White House and the New York DA.
Well,
So
I'll say this about
is a
Hillary
terrible
Clinton.
case.
If I could say something about Hillary Clinton, when she paid for part of the Steele dossier, the money was laundered through Perkins Coie and labeled as a legal expense. And it was probably done in New York. So I think she was fined. I forgot how much money, 400,000, 700,000, but she was fined some relatively small amount, and there were never any criminal charges brought against her. So it's okay for Hillary Clinton to pay for opposition research, otherwise known as the Steele dossier, and listed as an expense to Perkins Coie, but it's not okay for Donald Trump to do an NDA with someone who claims she slept with him and say it's a legal expense to Michael Cohen. I mean, I don't understand the two-tiered system we're dealing with here.
I'll make it even better for you, Mark. Trump's case is much stronger because he was self-funding this campaign. You don't need to report amounts you fund to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And so he never had an allegedly false campaign statement to whoever takes these, the Federal Election Commission. Hillary had false statements on her campaign forms. Trump never had a false statement on the campaign form.
Right.
That's the thing about it, which makes his case far stronger than that of Hillary or John Edwards, who was acquitted and he had his campaign supporters paying $900,000 to help bury the story about his mistress. He got acquitted. But once again, you had issues of campaign reporting because his campaign contributors gave him that money and didn't report it. So we have situations in which there's arguable campaign report violations, but they don't apply to Trump because Trump never had to list any of these things and never made a false campaign deal. So what they did is the false statement is in a business record that nobody's going to look at. The business record was made after the election,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just in the books of Trump, the Trump organization, as it is repaying Michael Cohen. Now, there's no doubt they're trying to keep it secret that he's making payments to a porn star. Nobody
Mm-hmm.
wants that out.
Right.
But the fact that nobody wants something out does not make it a crime. So it is a terrible two-faced system of justice we're facing, and it goes along with what I'm saying about the reporting. So what happens is you have two-faced reporting, one standard for one side, another standard for the other, in which you can literally, when you're getting your opponents, you can actually lie and so forth and conceal the truth. And likewise, you can also help your buddies by either avoiding the truth or by coloring favorably. So we have this two-tier system of justice enabled by a two-tiered system of reporting. And if you didn't have the reporters are supposed to be the watchdogs. They're supposed to be the people. They'll tell you that. Well, without fear or favor, we're telling the public so the public can be advised. Well, if they're not reporting fairly, then biased government politicians can get a murder. That's supposedly what Nixon did. He didn't. They accused him of that,
Mm-hmm.
but Nixon actually didn't do that. He was not lying about what happened because he didn't know what had happened. And he was not concealing what had happened because he didn't know what had happened. But yet today, if you ask anybody, oh, Nixon was concealing what really happened in Watergate, the guy didn't know. I mean, my book, I'm a lawyer and I don't put things down that I can't prove. And I've proved this one in spades. I've proven it 10 times over.
Mm-hmm.
And if, uh, I think the people that are on the ball around the country know about my findings, but most of the great mass of people there who, go to work every day and don't spend a lot of time researching the internet won't know that uh, what my findings are regarding the Post. But that's where it all started. And once we established that a major paper deliberately deceived in order to destroy a president, once you establish that precedent, and then we all have to look at what's happening to Trump today. Is this the same thing? Is this a replay in modern age using modern media to do exactly the same thing? And it is. And with Trump, of course, it's not happening just once as it happened to Nixon with Watergate. It is constant. It's been constant since 2016.
Do you have time to go over the Fulton County case?
Sure.
Yeah, I'd like to hear
The
what you
Fulton
think about
County
that.
case. Sure. The Fulton County case in Georgia, first of all, there may be an issue as to whether the prosecutors are disqualified because they're obviously involved in sort of a corrupt dealing using the state funds for personal enrichment of Fannie Willis and her boyfriend. So she may get knocked off of the case. But basically, the problem with the Georgia case is it involves, first of all, it's very sprawling. It covers states other than Georgia, and so it's a state case that is getting into Trump's conduct regarding a federal election, even outside of Georgia. The major allegation in that case is that Trump told the falsehood or a series of falsehoods. He told he was talking to I want to say Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State, and he said, "Find me 11,000 votes."
Mm-hmm.
So the allegation is that Trump was asking Brad Raffensperger to just make up
Right.
11,000 missing votes, sort of to commit fraud on the public. Trump wasn't doing that. He basically had outlined in the other 2 hours of the phone call,
Right.
he had outlined all the various findings they had in Georgia. And I will tell you right now, there's some tremendously questionable electoral practices in Georgia. He was outlining all the different places he thought Raffensperger should investigate, and he would clearly find 11,000 votes, which were needed to change the vote to Trump from Biden. There have been serious corruption issues in Fulton County, for example. Now, that's a lot different than saying make up votes. What he is saying,
Right.
look, there are probably 50 or 100,000 phony votes out here. Just go out and find me 11,000 of those. Do some work, do your homework. You're Secretary of State, you're supposed to do this and ensure free elections. The problem is there was egg on Raffensperger's face because he was the one who allowed Stacey Abrams to he signed a stipulation in a lawsuit that made it almost impossible to challenge a signature. So what happens after Raffensperger unwisely agrees to that? Now you have a raft of false signatures that can't be challenged, or at least can only be challenged after the election, which again is a real tough battle. So Raffensperger doesn't want any backlash over how he really probably caused the loss of Trump in Georgia. So he's really fighting Trump. And that's what people have to understand about that. Because Raffensperger's a Republican doesn't make him a guy that's straight down the middle on this one. He's saving Brad Raffensperger's skin and not worrying about Donald Trump. So that's a phony case.
Yeah.
Um,
As a non-lawyer,
the
I
case
was
on
going to
January-
say, as a non-lawyer, I did something I think a lot of people hadn't done. I listened to the entire phone call, and I also read the entire transcript. And after I did that, it was very obvious that Trump was not asking Raffensperger to make up votes. As you said, he laid out case after case after case after case after case, even giving the exact amount of fraudulent votes involved with each particular case, and said, I only need you to find me X number of votes. He didn't say, I mean, Trump would have to be a complete idiot. And I know some on the left think he is, but he would have to be a complete idiot to ask someone to fabricate votes with as many people that were on that line that day. But one last thing I wanted to ask about that case. My understanding is the tape recording of that phone call was taking place in Florida, which is a two-party consent state, so that really shouldn't even be admissible to begin with. True or false?
That's right, and that's a crime.
Yeah.
That's a crime, at least if if that was done with some kind of malintent. But certainly, if the person offering the tape knows it was taped in Florida, then you're basically not following the law. Whether you're guilty of a crime or not, I'm not sure about that as what the criminal intent was of the taper, but it is against the law and it shouldn't be admissible in evidence.
Do you want to look into your magic crystal ball and tell me how you think a lot of these cases are going to turn out, if any of them are going to be shot down on appeal? What do you think? Is Trump going to go to jail? I mean, what do you see, given your enormous experience and your storied career? I would think a lot of people would be very keen on finding out what you think is going to happen.
Well, I think that the present criminal case, he's probably going to get convicted because the judge is going to give bad instructions. Okay, and the jury is going to think that it's somehow illegal to get together to get a favorable or to hide an unfavorable story. That's not a crime, but I think the judge will instruct that way, and there will be a conviction on the basis that there was an illegal conspiracy. That said, it's possible that you might have one or two holdouts. If you can have one or two holdouts and you get a hung jury, this case will eventually be defeated because on appeal, it's a bunch of error. The judge knows that this is an appealable case. He's made considerable errors, but it doesn't matter to him if the appeal being overturned happens after the election. He will have done his job by smearing Trump before the election. So what I would say is he's either going to get convicted or it's going to be a very narrow hang on that one. Okay. And the public, I think, though, does not think much of the facts of that case to warrant, really clutching their pearls.
Okay.
It's causing about a 2-point difference in people's attitude toward Trump right now. Now, the January 6th case is again that I think will be so tied up in presidential immunity and free speech that on appeal, it probably will not stand up. However, he's got a biased judge against him. She'll do the best she can to get him convicted. The real issue there is whether that case is going to go. This is the January 6th case. If it is going to go to trial before the election, there's a good chance it won't. It depends on the Supreme Court decision and what they decide the mechanism will be for the courts below them to determine what's immune and what's not. And I suspect that their decision, which will be in favor of presidential immunity, at least as to part of the case, will come out, but it may lower court proceedings and perhaps even another appeal to the Supreme Court. And once again, that thing could get put off past the election. If it doesn't get put off past the election and the judge is allowed to frame the issues for the jury, that will be a conviction, because I think the judge is going to do everything she can to convince Trump. And you've got a 90%. As a trial lawyer, I care about my jury. And both in New York and Washington, D.C., you couldn't get worse jury pools for the president. They're basically 90% against the guy. And they're highly politicized places. Any place else in the country, Trump would have a fair shot. Even a blue city like Chicago, he'd have a fair shot, or you name it, but not in New York and not in D.C. Now, the one case where I think he really has vulnerabilities on the law are 8 of the 41 counts in the Mar-a-Lago case in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
Because he obstructed, it looks to me like he obstructed and participated in lying to the government about whether he'd given all his documents up.
Right.
Now, again, Hillary did the same thing, and Comey said that she shouldn't be prosecuted. Hillary was probably worse, but nonetheless, Hillary committed a crime, and probably so did Trump. That said, that case will probably not get tried before the election for various reasons. The prosecutors really played some games there and is paying the price. So I don't think that case, which is the best case against Trump, is going to go before the election. So to summarize, Trump may get convicted, will get convicted at least, probably will get convicted one time, perhaps 2 times before the election,
Mm-hmm.
Based upon biased judges with biased juries. And it will look very bad for our judicial system, which up to now has been fairly much held in high regard. You've got a corrupt government, a corrupt press, but you usually don't have a corrupt judiciary. And this is sort of exposing, I don't want to say the person in D.C., the judge in D.C., I don't think is corrupt. I just think she's very much of a partisan political person, very, very much an Obamaite. I think she means well. I think she's very smart. So I don't want to be misunderstood as saying I think she's actually corrupt. I have my real questions about the judge in New York. I think he knows exactly what he's doing, and he knows that it's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But those are my impressions, Mark. I think you might have a conviction on your hands here. So let's hope there's one hang here. And let's also hope that there's enough questions on immunity and how you apply it. Because Trump cannot be convicted on the basis of an act that is arguably within the outer ambit of his executive authority. How you define what that is the million-dollar question, and I don't know how that's going to play out.
Well, I thank you for sharing your expertise with us here today. And I certainly don't want to forget about the book. And the book is entitled Postgate: How the Washington Post Betrayed Deep Throat, Covered Up Watergate, and Began Today's Partisan Advocacy Journalism. This has been a very informative amount of time that we've spent together here today. I greatly appreciate you joining us, and I certainly want to give you an open invitation to come back whenever you want. And I hope you and your spouse have a lovely holiday in Ireland.
It's a lovely holiday for us, and I'm really I haven't spent enough time here. My family comes from here,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's really just a treat to get around and see it. The people in Ireland are just lovely. I just can't think of a friendlier place.
Well, you gave us more time than we were scheduled for. I greatly appreciate that. Now it's time to go out and enjoy Ireland. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it.
Yes. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Tea Party Power Hour with Mark Gillar.